All right. Hello, I'm Coach Reed from Highland High School, and
We're gonna get, oh, it says we're recording now. I don't know if it started. Now it did. Okay. So this is Coach Reed from Highland Central School District, and I'm Mia Beck, and I'm gonna start by asking, in your opinion, what are the strengths and weaknesses of the program here?
all right. So we frequently change the way that we are teaching our classes, but currently I think one of our strengths is that we teach our units in chunks of 3. So 3 days of training, 3 days of fitness, and 3 days of competition. So we still kind of focus on some sports because we noticed that that was kind of the motivation for a lot of our students. So for example, if we were to do a volleyball unit, we would do 3 days of training for volleyball where there's 2 activities per day and they flip flop halfway through the period. And we actually do split the gym, which is not something we had done previously, but we found that doing 2 small activities keeps their energy and interest, and if they get bored with the first one, it's over pretty much. By the time they get bored, they're moving to the next one, and then when we get to the other two chunks, so the 3 training or the 3 fitness days and the 3 tournament days, we split the groups in half so that most of the time they're with a group that they chose. So sometimes we divide it up based off of like competition level, like this group is maybe more of a recreational style group first, this one's really competitive. And so
I'm sorry, do you split them up and ask them, like, depending on their activity level, like if they want to be more competitive or if they don't?
yeah, so especially for most of the sports, we let them choose, like, okay, so, you know, if volleyball, if you really like volleyball, you really want to go competitive, choose this side. If you're like, well, I like it, but I'm not quite there, they go to the other group. And so it doesn't matter what class roster they're on, they get to choose for that. And then one group goes to the fitness center and does training, like fitness training that, and most of the time we try to relate that to what you would do for that sport. So, you know, for volleyball, some of the examples that I can think of, like we did a lot of plyo box work so that they're working kind of on that, their jumps and their power there. I can't think of some of the other stuff, but we work in the fitness center for 3 days, and while the other group is doing a tournament, and then they flip flop. So each unit though is still 9 days or so, and they get 3, 3, and 3. And we just found that that's been helpful to keep everyone interested. I think when you were in school, we did a fitness group and a sport group. Is that sound right?
Yeah.
Which kind of worked, but it was always unbalanced. And then we also felt like one group wasn't getting the same types of skills, and we wanted both groups to get exposed to the same stuff so that at least you have it in your toolbox. Like we always are telling the kids, we're going to expose you to as many things as we can, put it in your toolbox and decide if you want to use it later. Just like if you're, you know, you have a toolbox for a car, you might not want to use the tire wrench, but you might need that someday. You know what I mean? So we kind of try to compare it to just putting it in there, getting the knowledge so that someday maybe you'll use it, even if it's not what your interest is right now. So that's why we kind of switched to this, so that they're still learning some fitness center stuff, they're still learning some sports stuff, and some training ideas and things like that. So that's a perk, that's a positive, a strength of ours. I'm trying to see what I wrote. I took some notes. Yeah, so I pretty much touched on everything. We like that it seems to make it so that kids don't get bored and that they stay interested. And it's like, if they really hate that unit, like say I'm the kid, I hate volleyball, it's only 3 days of gameplay. Like anyone can make it through 3 days of gameplay. You know what I mean? So we almost sell it that way too. If it is something that someone really doesn't like, it's only 3 days. You can make it through that. So we definitely have been seeing some more participation and willingness when we break it up like that.
Yeah, it's been stretched out too long too. I remember that the activities weren't stretched out too long. Like we switched and it was good. Kept on
kind of keeping it. Yeah, exactly. Some of the weaknesses. So This one's a hard one to answer, as always, weaknesses, but it's important. So one of the things that I said is a weakness, and it's not necessarily our fault or in our control at all, but it does control some of our weaknesses, is our class sizes. We often have way too big of class sizes, so it makes things really difficult to keep all people participating or even just do certain units because there's just so many kids. And it's very unbalanced. Like we'll have a class of a lot of kids and then a class of like 15. And so it's just all over the place and hard to prepare for. But with that aside, we have been able to figure out rotations and things like that, so it works. But that's definitely a negative of the whole picture. And then in terms of our program, some things that I think that we could do better is we aren't great with how to handle when students are unprepared, like they don't, and we let students participate as long as they have sneakers. So that's good because we're getting more participation there for sure. There's not that many students sitting out, but if they are completely unprepared or if they're on like a medical that's only like 3 days, we really don't have a solid system that works. We have ideas, we try to give little projects, we try to have like, oh, well, you'll ref today, or oh, well, you'll do this today, but it's not, I feel like there's a better way. So that's definitely a weakness. I don't have answers to my weakness, but we're trying to kind of figure that out, you know? What'd you say?
Yeah, I said that was good. Yeah,
so that's definitely a weakness that we are kind of constantly trying to come up with new ideas for. And then the other one that I thought of, and I actually thought of this after I read the rest of the questions, was our like full program K through 12 fluidity isn't really great. The district gets us together maybe like a couple times a year to work on our full district curriculum K through 12, but it's not nearly enough time to really keep that like flow going. I do feel that like, you know, in kindergarten and at the elementary school, they're still working on the good locomotor movements and the basics, and then middle school kind of building onto that. But I still think when I look at some of these other like programs, I'm like, oh, that would be great, you know, but we're just not there. And I don't know if that also has to do with such a small school and not having a director of phys ed. We're all kind of just trying to get together on our own, or you know, it's just that's another negative of the program in general.
Yeah, thinking about it, like looking back now, I can see like there is a big gap of like you said, starting at the locomotor, and then you go to like middle school, play all these small sided games, and it's like, I don't know, big gap. So yeah, I feel like that'd be good to have like someone to like mend everything. So
yeah, and we've tried, you know, like there's been these conversations of this could be covered here, this could be covered there, but it's just not, it's not there yet. I do think that the middle school is actually doing a really good job right now, kind of matching what the high school expectations are, which I think is good. But I still don't know about the match between like elementary school and middle school, you know?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So question number 2, please describe the grading policy for physical education.
All right, so I sent you the kind of the percentages of what our grading system is. So it includes the, I didn't write this part down because I had sent it to you, but it includes the physical literacy knowledge, the physical literacy performance, the reflection and goal setting, and then also there are 2 categories that are daily grades, which is the attendance and attire and the participation, or I mean the personal and social responsibility. So their daily grades every day, they start with 4 points, and that's 2 for attendance and attire. So are they there and on time, and do they have fully dressed in athletic gear? And they don't have to change necessarily, but they have to be in the gear. So we're not like marking off, oh, you wore jeans and now you have sweats, but are you in clothes that you can move in and be comfortable moving in for PE? Obviously, we encourage some changing, but we don't really enforce that like that. And then the 2 other points are the personal and social responsibility, which we include kind of a larger picture of, Are they participating? Are they being respectful? Are they being, respectful to their peers, to themselves, to their teacher? All of that kind of goes into those points as well. So that's like every day they get those 4 points. And then on certain days, we might do a knowledge assessment, which would be added, or a performance assessment, or a reflection assessment. Especially in the fitness center, a lot of times we do like tracking. So they have to track what they've done, and we'll often count those points too. Like, okay, you're doing, because that's kind of what we're trying to encourage them to do, is know how to track yourself, know how to then kind of plan for more. So those are some of those other kind of reflection and goal setting types of points that they might get here and there. And yeah, so that's pretty much our grading, and then it all goes into the percentages. And our goal was, with our grading, to not have one thing end up making someone fail. Mm-hmm. Obviously, we want success. And so like we tried to make it so that if a student is really bad with maybe their quizzes or something like that, and they struggle with that, it's not going to make them fail if they do everything else well. Same thing, like if their performance assessments, their skill assessments, we don't necessarily look at the result of, a free throw, but more of like the process of it and improvement of it. So we sometimes do fitness testing, and we have, goals that we want them to reach to be healthy, but then we also look a lot more at their improvement and their effort at improving versus like their actual, score on the test, if that makes sense.
Yeah. So for your cognitive domain, is it mostly just self-assessed, or do you have quizzes that are like based off of knowledge of like the activities you're doing also, or is it just self-assessed mostly?
So the cognitive is more so the quizzes, and we have actual assessments on Schoology, the platform that we use. But then the performance are more of the self-assessments.
Gotcha.
Yeah, so like the skill stuff is more, or like the psychomotor, whatever, is more of the self-assessment, but then the knowledge is usually quizzes online, and they usually get a couple tries, because again, it's not supposed to be a trick. It's supposed to be like a learning process as well.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
So for the third question, does the school or school district have a curriculum for physical education? If so, what type of curriculum is it?
All right, so yes, we do, but like I kind of had mentioned, it is frequently changing, both just for the high school, but also like the one that we have tried to make a couple times for the K through 12 process. Our most recent curriculum, we broke down into topics that we want the kids to leave with versus versus unit by unit. I don't know if that makes sense. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 topics. So the first one is physical literacy knowledge. So that's like what did they actually know about sports, working out, all those things. Then we broke those down too as well into the fitness components. So cardiovascular endurance, muscular strength and endurance, flexibility, small-sided games, and lifelong sports. So like that's our bigger categories. And the reason we broke them down that way is because then different sports and different units can fit in to multiple. So like that, so instead of setting it up like by unit, it's set up by those topics. What topics do we want them to get out of that? Like, what do we want them to know about cardiovascular endurance, right? And then we'd break those things, and then what sports meet that? And then, okay, at some point we're going to do that sport during this time, or that fitness activity during this time. And that's kind of how we set up our curriculum. The other reason we did it like that is because we don't always like to do the same unit the same time of the year. So we've kind of switched, like sometimes we do badminton right around winter break, and then sometimes we do badminton earlier in the year, and then sometimes, you know what I mean? So that way we can kind of change the dates of our curriculum, but it still is covering the same type of stuff. But that's our most recent. Like I said, it has changed a fair amount.
That's awesome. So for question 4, does your school use the new SHAPE American National Standards and Outcomes? document? Why or why not?
So yes, that was question 4. I might have read this wrong. I thought that was 8.
Yeah.
Okay. What'd you say?
You need to read it again to you?
No, I haven't. I found it. So yes, and to be honest, when we looked at it, it's not that far off of the national standards. So what we had pretty much already reached that. And when we looked at our actual document, we just slid them into the ones that we thought it fit with. It's not as drastically different because it matches. It is different than the older New York State standards, but it really matches the national ones pretty well. Maybe a little bit more specific in some areas or less specific in others. But that was one of the meetings that we had last year before the shutdown, where we had to kind of make sure that we were still touching everything, and we just slid them into where we already felt like we were reaching it. And most of them, like I said, we sort of feel like we're at least aware of. We try to reach them in certain units, especially depending on the grade level too.
Yeah, that's good that you're keeping up on it too and changing it to stay on track. So, question 5: does your program use technology? If so, what type?
So yes, for the high schoolers, they have Schoology, which is our online did you have Schoology when you were here?
Schoology.
Okay, so we have Schoology still, and actually all the classes pretty much use it, especially right now because of all of this online stuff, but that's where all of their knowledge assessments are through. So we use that both in the building and sometimes for homework. But we do, most of the time when we do our quizzes, they are in class now. And during those training days that I mentioned, one of the activities sometimes is a quiz. So it'll be like a video or a demonstration and then a quiz on that. And then they'll go and do the activity in the room or in the gym. So we use the lobby area we have a laptop cart and stuff like that. So they use that there. And then otherwise, we use a tiny bit of technology sometimes in the fitness center with some QR codes, but not very frequently because we sort of sometimes want their phones away more so than out. And then otherwise we use music. I know sometimes some people consider that technology, some don't, but we use it. We have a pretty nice sound system. I don't know if you've been to the school in a while. I think you probably have, probably for basketball games and stuff, but the sound system now is pretty good. And Bluetooth and everything. So we just have our phones playing music. So we use our phones a lot for like the cues of stop, go, faster, you know what I mean? Like things like that. So I would consider that technology. I know there's much more advanced technology that we could use, but that's our level, at least at this point.
Yeah, I remember when I was in school, when you'd play the music, I feel like it would like give people more energy and be like more motivated to like want to do things. I don't know. That's just how I am too. So
yeah, oh no, 100%. It definitely makes it fills a vibe sometimes that you need to have in there. It kind of like puts the right mood in, and even like recently. Oh, so I guess this is technology too, especially this year, but in previous years as well, we use like a projector to project up on the wall. So especially in the beginning of the year where we
stuff. I remember that.
Yeah, so we still do some of that. We've done a ton of yoga with that recently, especially because we're both not totally comfortable leading yoga yet. We're not at that point. So when we do just want to do like a good flow, we put it up on the board. So on those days we play like even as they come into the gym, we have the lights dimmed, and then like we play like calming music because it sets that tone for what we're about to do.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah.
Awesome. So the next question: how do you manage your classroom and maintain discipline?
So this is a loaded question, but I would say right from the get-go, there has to be the clear expectations, and there is like a weird balance between coming in too strict and making them not want to connect with you, and then coming in with sort of like some leniency, but still sharing those expectations and making sure they know those expectations. I typically start a little bit stricter with my expectations, but again, making sure that I build those relationships first. And this took me a while to get, actually. I feel like I didn't know how much a relationship with a kid could impact the way that they learned and learned in my class in particular. So I would say it doesn't sound like this is answering the question, but my biggest concern most of the time for that first month or two of school is to get to know the kid, more so than getting them moving. Even though, yes, obviously I want movement, I want them to be playing and active, but if I make a connection with the kid, I'll start to learn about them. They'll start to learn about me. I have to be a little bit vulnerable almost, which I know, especially in the beginning, I was like, ooh, I don't want to share that type of stuff with kids. Not that it's anything, but I didn't even want to talk about like my personal life at all, or, you know, what activities do I like versus not like. And now I share like, oh, I do not like this, this, or this, but I love this, this, and this. And I hope that I can help you figure out what you like and don't like type of thing, you know? So again, I know this doesn't sound like I'm answering the question, but building those relationships first makes it so that the students want to respect you more and will follow the rules and expectations a little bit more. If they don't like you, not even necessarily like you, but if they don't have that relationship with you, they're not going to be as likely to follow your rules, follow your expectations. And so that's kind of how I feel like I manage the classroom, by building those relationships, especially too, because if you have, you know, 5 students that do, you know, you've connected with and everything like that, if there's 2 that aren't, a lot of times that peer pressure kind of helps in a good way. Like they're like, why are you guys doing that? You know, and it's like, oh, just listen, just be quiet, just, you know, whatever that might be. And then in terms of like actual discipline issues, I mean, it's similar to probably what you've been taught already, but the proximity thing, sometimes you go closer to the student, they start to realize they're probably not doing what they're supposed to be doing. Focusing on positives, giving compliments to students who are doing the right thing, pointing out the right thing, without making it super duper obvious, but still you're also trying to make a point there. And otherwise just removing or having a conversation. Like a lot of times when I have approached a student, I'm like, hey, are you all right? Like, how are you doing? Or I've even noticed that like if I give them a challenge to make something harder, sometimes they're like, oh, okay, fine, I will do that. Like they were just bored or it was too easy for them. So it's not always necessarily that they're trying to be bad in a sense, like a bad kid, but they're just bored or they just are having a bad day. So they're like, oh, I'm just gonna, you know, take it out on the wrong thing. But still, that's their way of kind of dealing with their emotions. But I feel like all of that still goes back to the relationship type of thing.
So when you're first starting, like, how did you form that relationship? Was it like you just like would introduce yourself? Like, I don't know how to explain it really. Like, how did you put yourself out there like that? Because you don't want to like do it where it's not like appropriate. Like, I don't know. There's like a certain line. Like, I don't know.
No, there is, and I'm still figuring it out, and it definitely depends on the kid too. But what I've noticed is that, especially in the beginning of the year, we no longer like rush into, even on the first couple of days, we don't even rush into like whatever we're trying to cover that day. We have those one-on-one conversations for a little bit. We do. I don't think we did this when you were here, but now when the students enter the gym, they have to start walking just around the gym. And it sounds almost like boring, but it's not. It gives them a chance to chat with their friends. It also gives kids a chance to like deal with putting their phone away, because we do expect that the phones are away when we start class. So that walking moment almost gives them like a chance to transition into phys ed. And that's when we use our time to take attendance and to talk to them. And so like it's as little as like, okay, each day I pick a different kid that I'm going to try to connect with a little. And then that next time that I see them, maybe something happened that I can be like, oh, remember how we talked about? And just like making those tiny little connections can actually like build. But it definitely, I'm still learning, and there's still kids here that I'm like, I just don't know how to connect with you, you know, but at least I'm trying, and I think they see that too. So it's like, maybe we're not ever really gonna connect, but they see me asking them questions that I think they care about. And it is also, I share more now than I used to about like silly stories that I think are not that big of a deal, but when I share it, I realize that a student is like, oh, she shared that. You know, it's a little bit more of like, I mean, I talk about my dog a lot, and that connects with a lot of kids. I make fun of myself a lot, which also connects with kids. They're like, yeah, that's funny, you did that, or you know, it gives them a reason to connect with me. So it is something though that I think I needed to learn. Like I felt like I was moving too fast in the beginning, and I was too focused on that idea that, okay, after 2 minutes, I have to get them started with their warm up and I have to get them. And it's like, pump the brakes, especially in the beginning. You got to build those relationships. And then there'll be days where, yeah, all right, we're getting right to it today, guys. Like, let's go. And then I'll play with you, you know, but in the beginning, it's almost like slow it down. You know, take it a little bit and build those relationships, and don't be afraid to have the conversations with kids. And I think especially in the beginning, I was like, oh, no way. But now that's something that I've been working on for sure.
Awesome. So the next question, how do you provide for students with disabilities in your classes?
So this one kind of depends. If it's someone who's classified with something, we do have an adapted class. So there's a separate teacher who teaches adapted. They do push in when possible. So we have them in our classes, just with that extra help whenever possible. But we also do schedule them time either in the gym by themselves or in the fitness center by themselves, because we also see the importance of like letting them have their space too sometimes without other students around, and giving them that opportunity to participate at their level, and like having the same, you know, spaces and equipment to use. We also have a ton of just extra different equipment, whether as simple things as like just a different type of racket or a different type of ball or a different whatever. Sometimes we have kids on scooters when the rest of them are maybe running or doing crab. You know, we just kind of use different things like that. And then if it's not someone who's in like an adapted class for those reasons, it just comes down to kind of different equipment or different roles. There are times that we'll give a student a different role in maybe the activity than a typical, so that they can still kind of participate and be part of the group, even if it's not completely doing the activity that the rest of the class is doing. And then also like with other types of disabilities, I kind of mentioned this, they get multiple chances on, you know, assessments and things like that. We do a variety of, like, if you can't do the computer style assessment, you can have paper, and we can, you know what I mean, like things like that. And then otherwise with injuries, that just becomes kind of like what I had mentioned as a weakness. We don't always have the best options for those, but we have gotten more specific when we tell kids if they do get injured to have their doctors write what they can and cannot do. So we do sometimes have a different activity on the side for them. Like if you can't do lower body stuff, then we're going to bring in a resistance band and you can do some upper body stuff and things like that. But that's kind of, I feel like how we adapt to the people who have some disabilities.
That's great. So 2 more questions. Okay. So what advice would you give a new teacher just starting his or her first year of teaching?
All right. So I kind of touched on this already, but relationships, build them. And it's a weird line, because that's the other thing that I feel like in the beginning of my career, I got really, really close to a couple kids. And like, I was like, oh my God, like I love these students. And that was great. But I didn't really like see that there was, you know, I didn't understand why other students were being kind of bad or weren't respecting me. And I think it's because I was like, wow, I have really cool ones. And I focused on that. And I didn't really realize that I needed to make those relationships with all of them. and maybe not that close. Obviously, you're going to have, like, I'm sure you still have teachers that you're like, oh, I love them. I got so close to them. I can talk to them. And that's awesome. And that's okay too. But you do have to kind of remember that there's a lot of students, and to build the relationship, even if it's a small one, with all of them. Because that does lead to that classroom management, their motivation to want to move both in your class and then outside of class too. Because the more of an impact you have in a positive way on them, the more likely they're going to think about it outside of school and be like, oh, I'm going to go do this. And maybe Coach Reed would be happy with me. You know what I mean? And not necessarily always for me, but just, just something to make them want to move and want to learn from you, and having that relationship and kind of like the trust back and forth with them. So I definitely emphasize focus on relationships, listen to the kids. And I always I think about little kids when I say this, but like they always want to tell you stuff and you're like, okay, enough. But that's like a highlight for some of them. And then there's even high schoolers that I'm like, this is such a silly story. But I realized like in that moment, them telling that story, it was not a silly story. It was they wanted to share that with me. And it was a really big deal to them. And maybe just because in my mind, I was going through a million other things, it wasn't a big deal to me, but it was to them. So like listen to them and let them tell you a funny story or a silly story or a sad story, because it's for them at that moment that they're telling it to you because it really matters to them. And I think sometimes I was too focused on, like I said earlier, too focused on getting started, doing this, doing that. No, that's going to build a better relationship where then they'll want to do something. So that's my biggest piece of advice. I have two others. So second one is don't be afraid to try something new and let it fail. It's okay if it fails, and be honest about it and be like, okay, that didn't work. We're going to stop. We're going to try something a little different, because you're never going to, it is hard to put yourself in that position of you might fail, but otherwise you're never going to really learn how to grow or try new things if you're not. And then lastly, and it kind of falls into the same category of don't be afraid to ask for help. And because you, just like the students, we're always learning, and half the time I'm learning more from the kids than I feel like they are from me sometimes. But don't be afraid to ask the kids for help. Don't be afraid to ask your colleagues for help, and kind of always be learning, always be trying to learn new things, maybe new things that they want to do, maybe new ideas to doing something. Because it is kind of we picked a career that isn't just let's go in, do the same thing every day and then leave. It's not that type of career. It's definitely one where you got to be ready to try new things and change up what you're doing and kind of adapt with the times.
Mm-hmm. That's awesome. I'm really excited. So the last question is your school aware of or planning the implementation of the updated New York standards of 2020?
Yeah, so I thought this was the question that we talked about before. Is it
not? Now it is the same thing. So yes, yes.
Because I had that one at the bottom, and then so maybe I don't know, maybe it was just repeated, but whatever.
Yeah, it was just asked differently, but it is the same. So I don't know. So I can stop recording now.
Okay.
If I can figure it out.